Hey, all my IFG friends, this is Steve. I want to say, if you like movies like I do, we've started a new podcast called Happy Hour Flicks. You can find it anywhere podcasts are found. It's all about nostalgic movies that we love, and we bring on special guests each episode, and we also have specialty cocktails made for each one, too. So it really is an hour of a good time talking about movies that we love, like Gremlins, Seven, Free Willy. We talk about The Last Starfighter also. I mean, we kind of run the gamut across all the decades and really have a great time. So wanted to invite you to come over and join us. That's Happy Hour Flicks, anywhere podcasts are found.
This is
the independent
filmmaker's guide
from Framework Productions.
Framework
Productions.
First of all, thank you very much for joining me on the episode today, Rob. It's great to have you.
My pleasure.
I think that, I want to, eventually we're going to talk a little bit about coloring documentary, because that's a whole animal in and of itself, and specifically some of your work in there. But how did you get started? Like, how did your career come to be where it is?
I had a very circuitous route. I mean, I was interested in film from a very young age. And I played with Super 8 and like did stuff like that when I was a kid. Then I went off to college, and I started doing film for a little while. And this was I'm a little bit older, so it was back when film was film, and there was video, but it just looked horrible. And I've always been, about the picture, so I didn't want to go anywhere near video. So I started going to film school, and at some point I got a Claire MPR 60mm camera and was trying to get started as a DP, but the camera was so heavy, and I'm kind of a small guy, and any little thing broke and you had to send it to LA and pay a lot of money to get it fixed. It was oppressive. So at some point I started doing still photography, and it was incredibly liberating. And I went back to school and got my master's in fine arts, in interdisciplinary fine art, focusing on color photography. And I was doing my own C prints in the lab. So that was kind of my first experience really working with color closely. And then I also worked for a while doing design for print, and doing a lot of scanning of color slides and color correcting those for print. So
that's interesting. So what is that? Like, I'm not sure I understand what that job is.
Well, I was doing design work, but I was also working at a service bureau that had a drum scanner. So people would bring in color transparencies, anything from 35 up to like 4x5 color slides. And you put them on this drum scanner, you scan them, and then you bring them up on the screen and you color correct them. And that's partially, you've got a calibrated screen, but it's also partially you're looking at numbers, and you learn like where things should sit in the numbers too. So I did that for a while, and eventually video kind of caught up with film. Didn't completely catch up with film, but the DVX 100 was the first camera that had an image that could actually be beautiful sometimes.
Right, that's back in the day of the Lettuce Extreme, right? When and you put it on the HDV, and then you use photo lenses or lenses on an actual camcorder.
Oh yeah,
right?
Yep, the 35mm adapter. There were a couple of different ones.
Yeah, I remember those. Those are big, bulky devices that you attached, and it was very funny to see everybody shooting with like an HDV camera for a year. I can't remember. It was the HVX, I think, something that everybody used.
Right. There were a number of different ones. I got a DVX 100 and ended up making what I thought was going to be a short experimental documentary. And then it kind of grew, and I got ITVS funding and made this feature doc called The Key of G, which was on PBS in 2008. So that sort of launched my career in a certain way. And so I was, after that, I was doing shooting for hire and doing editing for hire. But the experience of, I hired this awesome veteran color grader, Gary Coates, to color grade The Key of G. And he's just a very generous soul, and really, like, as he was doing it, was very open with how he was doing it. And I learned a lot. from that experience, and that sort of got me interested. And after that, on my own projects, I would do at least a first pass of the color and then bring it to him, and he would, work with him with his calibrated screen, and so that's sort of how I got started. And he was a little bit of a mentor.
Oh, so with the narratives, and you've ended up directing more and doing more narratives along the way. Do you also do your own color grading whenever you direct something?
I have, yeah. The Key of G, that my first doc was color graded by Gary, but since then, everything that I've done the color grading on.
Wow,
Actually,
that's really brave, because I don't know. I hate editing my stuff alone. I always do like a look like for something, but I really don't think I would probably be the best person to color it in the end, just because I get too close to it.
yeah. I mean, it's good and it's bad. It's like if you are trying to be efficient with your time, it is not the way to do it. You
Lots
end
and
up
lots of
spending
hours in a dark room.
way too much time, but you're able to get exactly what you want. And also, it's just it has been a good way to hone my craft, doing that. So anyway, so I was at some point I sort of stopped shooting for hire because the camera that I had was, got too old, and I didn't upgrade the camera. So I was editing for hire, and at some point I realized that, like, I like finishing editing, but like the early part of editing made me insane. Like, it's too open-ended for me, and it's wrong for my attention to detail. It's hard for me to do a really rough cut. I just want to polish. It's kind of in my DNA. So so I started to gravitate more towards finishing editing, and got more interested in color grading, and finally got a Resolve system set up. And almost immediately, like the first day, I was in a sort of shared office space with other people. Like, I had my own room, but I had all these other filmmakers around me. And the day that I got my Resolve system up and running, somebody popped their head in and was like, "Hey, can you look at a couple of shots for me? I need to figure out if these are going to like fly or not." So I was just kind of, um, I was lucky that I had a big network of mostly documentary filmmakers around me who already knew me. And I was able to really hit the ground running, starting to color grade.
So the film that I noticed of yours that you colored was Stray with the Tribeca Film Festival. I saw the teaser for it. Still haven't seen the entire film, but what really stood out was also, it looks like a really, really intriguing, great idea for a documentary, but it seems like so hard to approach something like that as a colorist, because it is so all over the map. Like, it feels like there's footage at night that, you're just following basically stray dogs around
Istanbul.
Istanbul, dang it. I'm
That's all right.
following around Istanbul. But it's like, really, I mean, how did you get involved with the project? And then how did you approach coloring it?
So the way I got involved with the project, Elizabeth Lowe, who made Stray, I had worked with before. She went to Stanford, and many years ago, I became friends with Jamie Meltzer, who's a professor at Stanford, and through that, a film professor, and through that, I met a lot of Stanford people, and the Stanford people really stick together. So once you get a good reputation among Stanford doc filmmakers, suddenly you're working on a lot of Stanford graduates' films. And I now actually am one of the people who color grades the MFA films, the graduating films for the doc program there. But anyway, so Elizabeth Lowe had a film, which I don't think it was her thesis film. I think it was maybe her first year film, called Hotel 22. But it became an op doc on the New York Times website and won a whole bunch of festivals. And it's a great little film, and it was really fun to color grade. And that was the first thing I worked on with her. And she's just got this wonderful eye, um, and everything she shoots is just, I don't know. I really love working with her footage. So there was that, and then there were a couple other short things, and then Stray was her first feature. And she was actually I think she was in Hong Kong at the time that she contacted me about Stray. She's all over the place, but has lived in Hong Kong, lives in LA. I think she's in LA now. So we talked about it, and she sent me a hard drive, and we started on it remotely.
And then how do you approach like setting a look for a film like that? I mean, because from the teaser, there's lots and lots and lots of various stuff that I'm sure was just. I mean, I remember just even from the website too. There's a shot where they're in an alleyway, very dark, looking out into the rain, with brighter lights and stuff. How do you approach a film like that to make it feel cohesive?
Hmm. Um, I mean, it's the same as any documentary. In a sense, it was easier than a lot of documentaries because it was almost all shot on an Amira. I think it
So you actually had more color space to
had a
work
lot of
with.
color space, and also it was mostly shot on one camera. I work on a huge range of things, but I work on a lot of indie docs because that's sort of the community that I come out of. And so some indie docs will have been shot on like 8 different cameras because they were in production for 7 years and kept switching cameras, and then they got some archival footage that's off of a cell phone from the from 2012, and just like
Right.
the craziest stuff. And so
Or a beta tape that who knows how many times it's been transferred and digitized.
exactly. So I think it's one of my strengths is being able to take to look at fairly degraded footage and figure out what can I do with that. How can we make that fit in? How can we make that like a little more beautiful, and how can we make it match a little better? But
Is
but but
that do you
something.
think that's just go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, but something like Stray, it's all shot by her. Like every frame is shot by her, mostly with the same camera. So, and also with the Amira, or I think the other camera was C300.
Hmm.
And they both had, the Amira in particular is just a dream to grade, and so you've got all this latitude, and so it's really a question of just what do you want it to look like. I mean, you do run into limitations of like, okay, this shot was shot in really low light, and we barely, we have to really dig stuff out of the shadows and then fight back the grain, uh, the um the noise. Um but in general, we're pretty much able to go in whatever direction we want it to go.
So talk about the degraded footage a lot. You said that's one of your strengths. Is that just mostly intuition based, or is that just from doing it a whole lot? And are there any cases of a time where you felt like you were really able to improve the look of a shot?
Well, um, I mean, sometimes it's a matter of just thinking about what different way it could be degraded that's more beautiful. Like I mean, it's maybe because I come originally from the film world. Like I would much rather look at big old grain than I would at any sort of digital artifact. So if the story supports it, which is to say, if it's not wrong for it to look less like video and more like film, sometimes I will kind of knock out detail and denoise to get rid of anything blocky, um, in terms of um, in terms of interface. Sorry.
Yeah,
um,
sure. That absolutely makes sense. I mean, in visual effects, I know that's one of the things that, in just general, what you're doing many times is removing lines, even if they are, like naturally occurring straight lines. It's things that look staged, artificial, so that totally makes sense. You're just kind of blurring and, you know, denoising, I think is what they call it, but it's, kind of where you can degrade the footage, make it softer, bloomier, and
yeah,
stuff like that.
so you're knocking out anything blocky, and then stuff looks too smooth, so you add some grain back until you get and grain often, I mean, sometimes you have to throw big grain at something, and sometimes that's beautiful, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. Sometimes you have to denoise and then add back fairly fine grain, almost to the point where you don't notice it as grain, but it just feels like there's detail. Um, so it's just finding that edge. Um, yeah.
So if you were approaching, like, if you're an indie, you said you encounter a lot with indie films that because they do film for who knows how long could take to shoot a doc. It could take many years. Would you I mean, and cameras keep getting upgraded as they go. Do you think people should maybe stay on the same camera for the same project? Would that be like what you do think that may be a take to think at? Like, so for instance, if you started on a DSLR and you moved up to a, you had the ability to move up to a, very cam LT or something, would you not prefer they move up, or do you think it's just kind of case by case?
I think they should move up. I mean, um, I mean, if like I can make stuff shot on a nice camera look like DSLR if I need to, and I can pull the DSLR like out of that world into a softer look if I, to a certain extent. Like, at some point you run into like not having enough color information or something like that. But frequently, you can push it some. I mean yeah.
So, no, I think that absolutely makes sense. One question I've always asked colorists, and I really love the answers from everybody, is if you had the choice between resolution and color science, which would you pick? So, meaning, would you rather have 8K shot on a kind of lower end camera, or HD shot on a Mira Red?
Oh, definitely colored. I mean the resolution is nice sometimes, but I mean it's only when the only I mean it's much more frequent that I am trying to do something to a shot and it starts to fall apart because of not enough color information, than it is that there's just not enough resolution in a shot. I feel like sometimes, I mean, obviously there's SD. Sometimes people have some source that's SD because it's, historical or whatever. And you can usually upres it and kind of make it look okay. So that's another situation we might add
Depends on how SD it is.
Yeah. Or sometimes there's HD that is a codec that sucks and it is kind of sharp and theoretically has the resolution, but doesn't feel like it has enough information in it. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I haven't worked on anything that finished in higher than 4K. I mean, the 4K is nice, especially if people are going to punch in on things. Like people rarely make a 4K DCP. It's almost always a 2K DCP, because there's very few places that will show a 4K DCP. So I mean, there's 4K delivery for Netflix or whatever sometimes, but a lot of the stuff that I work on is heading for DCP or heading for the web. So yeah.
So I got a question for you about like coloring docs in general. What's your process like? Do you start by trying to make everything just match and then you start kind of grading and giving everything a look, or are you kind of doing them both simultaneously?
Well, there's a question of what I should do and what I do actually do, like Stray is a good example of something where I got excited and I went down a road of a look with her remote, where when she saw it, she was like, no, that wasn't what I was thinking. And I had to walk it back, and I was like, how many years, and I still have not learned that you need to like make sure to build a base and then put the look on top of it. But sometimes you get excited and you just like,
so you like neutralize and kind of correct, quote unquote, first, like make everything kind of unified.
Yeah. I mean, in general, I like to work with a filmmaker right off the bat. I get the project prepped, and then I have the filmmaker in. Like pre-pandemic, they were in my office usually. So with Stray, it was pre-pandemic, but I wasn't set up really for remote grading yet. So when I did have to work with someone remotely, it was a matter of on the phone and then posting things to Frame.io and getting feedback that way. Now I'm set up with a Streambox setup, so I can stream high quality color correct video to someone's screen with a 2-second delay in real time. So that's why I work with people remotely now. So anyway, so ideally at the beginning, I sit down with the filmmaker either remotely or here, and uh, I bring up in Resolve, you can do the lightbox view of your shots. So you basically get this big grid with all your shots. And I'll say like, okay, is there a place that you want to start? Is there a scene that's like really key to you, or is there, and we find a shot, go to it, and we start color grading it. And so I get the feeling of like, okay, how much saturation do they like? How much contrast do they like? Is there like some really strong look they're looking for? Is there, what do they want? So once I've graded a shot with somebody in the room, then either, they'll go off and do something else, or they'll just be like on their laptop doing other whatever while I start. And then I start matching everything, but I match everything sort of in that I I know the world that I'm matching things in, as
Right.
opposed to matching the whole film and then coming back and saying like, okay, how do you want it to look?
Totally.
Yeah.
Is it often that the documentary will vary? Like a narrative, you can have, you have unified themes, but then you can have like a super dark, moody nighttime scene followed by, daytime car chase. Is it often that you vary the look so massively in a documentary?
Sometimes, I mean, definitely less than narrative, I would say. I would say in general, documentaries, the look per se is less strong. People usually want it fairly natural. And the thing that I've learned is when people say they want a look on their documentary, that almost inevitably will get dialed back in the end. Like they'll say, "Oh yeah, I really want it to look like this," and then you give them that look, and they're like, "Can we bring
We
back the
just a little bit
saturation
less of
more?" And maybe like,
that.
especially when they're like, "Oh yeah, I want something really edgy." And
It
usually,
makes sense because you don't want the visual to be overcoming the story, and sometimes documentary is all about delicate storytelling.
yes, yeah. I mean, I feel like with documentary, a large part of it is just getting distractions out of the way, and a lot of times the distraction is stuff that doesn't match, and
Right.
footage that's just like, this is the important thing that happened, and there's an iris shift in the middle of it, and it's all kind of underexposed, and it's a lot more of a rescue operation. um,
Right. So when there is like an iris shift in the middle of it, I mean, do you always take the same approach? Do you ever, I mean, you trying to like keyframe across it to make it more subtle so you just don't notice it? Or are you trying to make one side match the other?
there's I don't remember which version of Resolve it got added, but there's an OFX called Color Stabilizer that when it works is like magic, and is just the best thing, because when it works, suddenly it's gone. Your iris shift is gone. And it's hard. I haven't figured out like what the elements are that sometimes it works and sometimes it just completely doesn't work. So if it works, I try that first. If it works, I'm like, yay. If it doesn't, then it's like, okay, find where the shift starts and where the shift ends, and then keyframe it. And it's pretty hard to get it perfect. There's always like a little bit of a bobble there, but I mean, the important thing is
Yeah.
like, especially if it's right in the middle of a shot, you don't want half your shot being too bright or half your shot being too dark. You want to try to even it out.
Yeah. It reminds me of like, if you ever get like a bump zoom or something, somebody actually has got a little too aggressive or stopped zooming or something on a zoom shot, and you always try and match it in post, but you can never quite get it totally perfect. You can always get it just enough that you don't notice it, but just kind of always futzing with it to try and get it to the right spot. So let's talk about timeline of a documentary. How long do you usually spend? Like whenever a feature documentary comes into your life, how do you how long does it usually stay there?
It really depends. Some move in and they don't want to leave. Uh, I mean, there's one that I did that was, they edited on Avid. In San Francisco, it's Premiere is really dominant. I mean, it used to be a Final Cut 7 town, and now
Hmm.
it's Premiere. I mean, there are people working in Avid, but it's almost everything I get is Premiere. And but there's this one doc, a it was a big budget doc, done in Avid, and the conform was kind of a nightmare. They had so much footage and there were so many snafus. So there was probably a week of conform and things
Wow.
sort of trickling in and like getting it worked out. And then there was the grading, and then yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like you can even start grading at that point. You got to kind of have most 90% of it together, I'd assume.
Yeah, you want most of it together. But anyway, a more normal situation. I mean, for your average doc, and it's hard to say what your average doc is, um, I mean, usually, I mean, sometimes conform is like 2 hours, or an hour.
Right.
Sometimes it's a day. It depends on a lot of things. And sometimes if somebody has a lot of um, like uh, a lot of like weird cell phone footage or things like that, then I spend a chunk of a day like deciding how I'm going to process that. I go back to the original, and then time doesn't really have time code, so I have to like match that back up and get it in. So it's more like online editing than it is color. Anyway, so
Right. And that's, yeah, it's about to say, I was like, that's what I used to do for cable shows.
yeah,
Like, so much is like just end up going back and pulling stuff from tape and trying to find source material and reconnect it. And then it won't reconnect.
yep,
Then you have to figure out what the hell you're going to do then.
yep. Um, so anyway, I'm kind of rambling. So there's conform, which can vary wildly. Best case scenario, when you have like a really tech savvy editor, and especially if you just have something that's all shot with a camera that has good time code, and somebody's prepped it in Premiere well, sometimes just everything links up and you're ready to go. And then in terms of how long it actually takes to grade, I mean, it's really different. I love uh, a nice slow moving documentary that doesn't have as many shots. Although sometimes those really long takes end up taking a long time to grade because you have to do a lot of keyframing if they move through a lot of different areas. Some of that in Stray, if I remember right.
You mean like you're like keyframing in secondaries, like, in wind power windows and stuff?
Sometimes, or I'm keyframing, if the camera is moving uh, through different spaces. Uh, Sometimes rather than keyframing on the color page, I will just put slices on the edit page with transitions, with cross dissolves,
Mm-hmm.
and so then I can do the separate
Just a
sections.
separate grade on two different shots and just work on the blend.
Yeah, most extreme example in one direction was probably this film called, I can't remember if it ended up being called New York Hair or New York Cuts, by Luke Lawrenson, the guy who made Midnight Family, which is a miracle of a film. If you ever get a chance to see it, like the shooting on that film is just incredible. It's a great film. It was at Sundance this last year. Anyway, but anyway, Luke made this film that's all long takes of different barbershops in New York.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Everything from like this Russian barbershop to a Puerto Rican barbershop to, I think it was the Senegalese woman ran a place. And so they're really long takes. And I think it's a feature film that has maybe 23 shots in it or something.
Wow, really? Wow, I've got to check this film out.
So that's one end of the thing. And then there's others where, some people cut really fast. And so you might have like 1,400 shots in a documentary. I mean, I'm sure reality TV is way worse, but thankfully I've never had to color grade any reality TV. So yeah, so the number of shots does make a big difference, and the repetition of the shots, like if something is,
if you can set a look and like kind of apply it and just tweak it.
yeah, I mean, if some documentaries are interview heavy, and if there's like 6 people who get interviewed a lot, then once you get those graded, that's a chunk of your film. It's more fun to work on the things like Stray that are all verite, but then each shot's going to be a little different. I mean, you can copy grades over and tweak them, but yeah, it's a lot more individual shot to shot attention there.
So in those shots like Stray, how much are you depending upon scopes and how much are you using intuition?
I mean, I always use scopes sort of as I'm starting. It's funny. I'm trying to think. It's like I'm looking at scopes and the image sort of like at the same time.
At the same time.
I mean, I think probably when I'm initially dialing in contrast and basic color balance, I'm definitely looking at scopes, but my eyes are flicking back and forth between the scopes and the image. Yeah, it's interesting to occasionally like turn off the scopes and do some grading and then see where you are with the scopes. I should do that more often.
Do you think it just lets you kind of go with the emotion of what you're feeling in the shot whenever you do that? That's interesting.
I would just be curious how much I can hit the same points without the scopes. Never occurred to me to try that actually.
Well, you got to try it, then send us the shot. Do one with the scopes and then do another shot that's similar without it.
But scopes are especially good, towards the end of the day when your eyes are getting tired and you're just like, where's this shot? What's going on? And like the scopes will tell you, whereas if you didn't have the scopes, you can, because your eyes adjust to where things are, you can be like grading, a bunch of shots in a row and they're all kind of green and you're like, it feels slightly like something's wrong, but you're not really sure. And then, if you look at your scope, scopes, you're like, oh, right. Okay. I need to go outside for 5 minutes and remember what the world looks like and then come back, at the end of a really long grading day. It used to be, when I was, like 5 years ago or something, after 6 hours of grading, I'd just be like, okay, I'm done for the day. Like I can't do anymore, and now I can do longer days, but it's hard to build up that it's a workout for this part of your brain,
For sure, yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about your COVID setup. You guys are designing at Lateral, like designing an individual room, right? Coming up for your clients. Why is that, and how do you think that's going to help?
Well, I've actually already started using it. So I'm the master tenant, and I have quite a bit of space here with various filmmakers in here. And there was Structure Films, the filmmakers who are making a film about Stuart Brand that was it was supposed to premiere at South by this last year. But anyway, they were in the room right next to mine. And then when they were done with their film, they moved out. So I had this empty room right next to my room. And I was thinking about the fact that, it's good to have the client looking at a monitor that, I've calibrated. But during the pandemic, it's not good to sit in the same room with somebody else all day. You don't really want to wear a mask all day. And so I basically set up that room. I moved my 55-inch OLED into that room, and just wired through the wall to that and put a couch in there. Figured out, actually the hardest part was finding a good intercom setup between the two rooms that sound.
Yeah, that was what I was going to say. How do you do talkback?
What I ended up doing was getting these little speaker phones. The brand that I got is eMeet Luna. It's like a little speaker phone that you could hook up to your phone or whatever, but it's USB. And I hook one up in each room, and then I use this piece of software called Loopback that lets you route audio. So I just route the speaker from one to the mic from one to the speaker of the other, and vice versa. And it works pretty well. And it's just always on. You don't have to press to talk. So
that's cool. So now they get to sit over there and they could be criticizing your shot and you're going to hear them.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's just the same as having them in the room, except that it's the next room over. And so, yeah. So that's been great. I've already had, I've had 2 individual clients and then this one client who came in and wanted to bring a couple people with him. And so there were 3 of them in that room. And it works well. It's funny though, there's a thing I always say about grading is like, I don't really look at my clients' faces very much, because even when they were in the same room as me, like the way that I have my setup is I'm sitting at a desk, and I've got, actually, if you look on my website, there's a picture of my setup, but there's my Flanders monitor right in front of me, and my panel and my two other UI monitors. And then in front of my whole desk, there's a couch facing the other way, and the client's sitting on that looking at the OLED on the far wall. So basically, I look at their footage all day, but I only look at their face like if we have lunch together or something, and when they arrive, when they leave. And now when they arrive and when they leave, they have a mask on. So it's that thing where I know I'm going to run into clients out in the world and be like,
and they're not going to not be able to recognize them. You're sounds like you're color grading for Zorro, really, the more we talk about it. Like coming in, although maybe if they brought the sword, it might be a whole different kind of day.
Yes.
So what are you working on next? What's next for you? You got any other big projects on the horizon you're looking forward to?
What's next? In terms of my own projects, I do not have one right now. It's been a while. I've been mostly concentrating on the color grading. The next thing I've booked is a documentary about this underground comic artist, Spain Rodriguez, which looks like it's going to be interesting. I haven't seen a whole cut of it yet. I've just seen like bits and pieces of it. Yeah, and I'm sure some other stuff will show up in the meantime. So
yeah, they come in waves. It feels like Colorists. It is like just a wheel. Like one comes in, one goes out. One comes in, one goes out.
Yeah, it's when the shelter-in-place thing happened, people asked me like, "So is it affecting your business?" And I'm like, "It's impossible to tell." I had this right before shelter-in-place. I had this crazy spring where it was just I color graded like in 3 months. I color graded like 3 features and a bunch of short things. It was just like it was a lot. Like I was just working. And then right as everything was getting done, because a number of the things were for South by, which didn't happen. But we finished them all for South by. And then shelter in place happened, and then it was quiet, but I was expecting it to be quiet after that thing. So I was kind of like, okay, what's going to happen, But I also feel like I'm optimistic because there's no less of a market for video content. If anything, there's more. And I think if I were someone who most of my business was commercial, I'd be more worried. But I feel like the indie doc scene is not going to be that affected. I mean, there's might be a little gap because people can't shoot during a certain period of time, but and then the other thing is that because of the way schedules are with finishing a film, like this next doc that I'm going to be doing, she started making I think 4 years ago, so it's like maybe in 2 years there's going to be a little lull from the things that didn't get shot during shelter in place. I don't know, but so far it's been fine.
Yeah. So if you like now having worked so much, in so many various areas, but specifically doc footage is what I'm interested in. What advice would you give people that are making their documentaries or about to start making their documentary now to really get the most out of it, or things maybe potentially to be aware of to try and avoid?
That could be a long list.
Are there any typical things that kind of happen over and over to you that you're like, this is something that every time I see it, I'm like, I wish we could avoid this?
I mean, there's things that have to do with the difficulty of the conform, which have to do with cameras that split things into split long takes into multiple files.
Now that's interesting because so for instance, like I'm trying to think of cameras that, I know Red does that, but Red's pretty good about how it wraps and comes back.
Yeah, I don't,
but there are
I don't really have a problem with red footage.
It's like very cam footage, like that splits it into stuff. I think Sony DSLR split it into, and Sony like the FS700, all those actually split it into like .mts clips, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess the big things I would say is try not to mess with your aperture in the middle of a shot. Like, just unless it's really off, just deal with it, you know? Because those are a pain to fix, and they're very obvious.
So I wonder about, like, going back to your other thing, like, so if you do have one of those cameras that split things up into multiple file structures and you need that, do you prefer them to be transcoded to, like, 422 HQ, or to a comparable codec that is a single wrapped file? Does that help?
Yeah, I mean, transcoding can be great. And we'll definitely make, if everything's ProRes, the conform's probably going to be easier.
And that'll ultimately save them time and money, hopefully, too.
Yeah. But it really depends. It's really a case by case thing. And it's hard for me to keep track of which cameras cause the problems, because I'm in the middle. I'm just like trying to solve the problem.
At that point, you're just trying to fix it.
Yeah. And what I do more and more is the way I ask people to prep things is to give me a reference, of course, with their titles, color, everything, and then also to strip off all the color and titles, and give me a ProRes 422 HQ of the whole thing, and then also to give me the Premiere with the timeline prep,
the original
for
source material.
XML. So I'll start out doing the XML round trip, and then if there's a bunch of shots that are like coming in and it's the wrong piece of the shot because the time code didn't match or whatever, we can choose to either fix it, or I can just take that single QuickTime, lay it on the track above, and just cut out pieces as I need it.
Right. That's smart. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it can definitely save you in a bind.
Yeah, it can save a lot of time. And sometimes you do that and you're like, I feel like I think there was some super white data in this that we're losing. So let's go back to the source.
Right. But then you can at least take it case by case.
Yeah, it can save a lot of time. I used to, when I was starting out, try to solve every single conform issue, but it's can be a huge time suck.
So Rob, if people want to find your work, where should they go?
There's lateralfilms.com, which has the films that I've worked on. And then if you go to the services tab, there's my reel for color grading. And then you can look on IMDb for the list.
Oh, yeah. Do you have a social media account or anything you'd like to direct people to?
I have social media accounts, but I don't really tend to them very well. So
lateralfilms.com is the place to find you.
Maybe this will spur me to actually use I have a Facebook page. My Instagram is kind of more my personal Instagram than, I don't have a Lateral Films Instagram, but maybe I should.
Maybe it's the time to start it, Rob. Well, it was great getting to talk to you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Nice talking to you.
Filmmaking is a collaborative experience, and so is this podcast. Follow us on Instagram at framework_productions for upcoming episode announcements, and leave your questions in the comments for our future guests. Please take a second to subscribe so you know about future episodes, and leave a review. It really does help us. IFG is a community, and we want to help you in your filmmaking process.
IFG is created by Framework Productions. This episode was directed by James Allardyce, produced and edited by Matt Mundy and Audrey Ray McHale, and hosted by Stephen Pierce. The music is by Glassboy. Find his music on freemusicarchive.org. See and listen to all the episodes plus bonus content at independentfilmmakersguide.com. Thanks for listening.
Hey friends, we just wanted to take a quick moment to talk about two personal things. First, we wanted to thank you, our listening community, and our wonderful guests, learning so much together along the way and continuing to learn, sharing our stories, making a lot of new friends, and collaborating, which is exactly what this is all about. Which also brings me to my second point. In great part to many of these new relationships, we wanted to let you know that we've taken a lot of this advice ourselves and made our own narrative feature film, Herd, H-E-R-D, Herd, which is premiering this October on Friday the 13th in select theaters as well as on VOD. Personally, I think it's the perfect kind of scary movie to watch during our favorite scary season. So we'd love for you to celebrate with us and watch Herd. You can pre-order it on Apple TV, and of course, do the communal thing, see it in theaters. Of course, for all of this, please see our show notes, but basically, we're going to keep it all updated at herd.film. That's herd.film, herd.film as well. thank you again. And be sure to give us a rating and a review over on Apple Podcasts so we can continue to build this community and collaborate. IFG, how movies get made.